Well, good morning. Welcome to church this morning. We're so glad to have you here. Man, look at the weather. Isn't that awesome? Going to be green before long. Very excited about that. Just a couple of announcements real quick. First of all, we're going to be starting to get ready for our Easter egg hunt that's coming up for our children. And so if you'd like to bring in some candy, small items to put in the eggs, you just put back in the table in the back. The ladies will be meeting to put all those eggs together, and it's so much fun watching them each Easter Sunday go out and see the families that come and get to enjoy that. Also, we're Operation Christmas Child items for March in the bulletin. We started this a couple years ago, and we're bringing in items, a few items each month to fill our Operation Christmas Child boxes. So you can do that all at one time, or if you'd like to bring in a few items each month, then we'll get together in November, put those together, and send those off for Operation Christmas Child. But just a reminder that there's a table in the back. You can set those items back on that table in the back. Judy reminded me that on Easter, we're going to be having our Easter brunch. And so that's always an awesome time. We have kind of an early service, the He is Risen service. Then we have brunch, and then we have our worship service. And it's just a great potluck. There's going to be a sign-up sheet on the table in the foyer for the Easter brunch, and invite you to take a look at that. Lots of things going on. Look at the bulletin. We're not going to go over everything, but we're so glad to have you here this morning to worship with us today.
Please stand as we sing together, Standing on the Promises.
'Cause
Heavenly Father, Lord, we just want to thank you for our time together this morning. And, it's just really good to be here in this place. To just be able to pause. Sometimes life as it gets so hectic. We thank you that we can come here and just kind of rest in you and be kind of reminded of what life is and who you are and what you want to be in our lives. I want to thank you for the amazing story that each of us have because of you. We're here this morning just to worship you because, God, you're just worthy of it. And so, God, as we sing these songs and everything that we do, just from our heart to yours, we just lift you up this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Thank you, and be seated as we worship the Lord for
I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear crying out my ear, the song of
At this time, we'll dismiss our children for Children's Church. Well, we have been doing this. We started a study. We're a couple weeks into it about angels and demons and the spiritual realm that the Bible talks about. You know, one of the things that I really like about Christianity and about God's Word is it helps me understand me. It helps me understand also, though, the world around me. And one of the things that we look at when we see our world, is we see a world that's messed up. And it seems like it's on a determined path. And it's almost like there's a focus. It's almost like there's a force or there's something behind it. Why do things keep marching so consistently in the direction that they're marching overall in our world? And as we've looked over the past several weeks, we've seen that there is a spiritual warfare that God describes in His Word. And He tells us that we need to be aware of what's going on. You know, just like in sports, a lot of times you'll see before games, the coaches will study the films of the teams they're going to be playing. That's what we're doing. That's what we're going to be specifically doing this morning as we talk about our great archenemy, Satan, and who he is and what he does and how he impacts us in our world. Last week we talked about angels. And I thought it was really interesting. Bryant sent me a text, and I looked up that article. I wanted to read a story that came out this week. Last week, we were just talking about angels and the role that they play in our world. And we saw who they are. They're created beings, and they're ministering servants, and they take care of us. We talked about the idea that God gives us, that they are guardian angels that watch over us. And this article was from the Detroit News. And this was out on Thursday, and it says this. It says, was a mysterious voice from heaven is the headlines of the article. It says, yes, the headlines were sensational. Crash, miracle, Utah officers hear voice. A mysterious voice leads police to baby submerged in car. It says, before you get all cynical, consider this. These were cops and firefighters, rugged, tough guys, well-versed in crime and the dark side, rather than anything resembling winged celestial beings. And it wasn't just one person who heard the voice, but 6 of them, 4 police officers and 2 firefighters. As Spanish Fork police officer Tyler Beddoes told the Desert News in Salt Lake City, it wasn't just something that was in our heads. To me, it was plain as day because I remember hearing a voice. I think it was DeWitt who said, we're trying our best to get in there. How do you explain that? I don't know. That plea of help led officers to rescue a Utah toddler in an overturned submerged vehicle in the Spanish Fork River near the Utah-Colorado border last weekend. Trapped inside, upside down in her car for 14 hours, was an 18-month-old baby named Lily. Her mother, Lynn Grossbeck, 25, did not survive. Police say that Grossbeck was returning from a visit with her parents on the night of March 6th when she hit a cement barrier on a bridge and drove off the roadway. The car was not visible from the road. It wasn't discovered until a fisherman spotted it around noon on Saturday. The first responder said the voice catapulted them into action, rolling the overturned submerged vehicle in the frigid neck-high water so cold several had to be treated for hypothermia. In interviews with AB News, local TV stations, and other media outlets, the 6 rescuers said the voice fueled their adrenaline. It was a positive boost for every one of us because I think it pushed us to go harder a little longer, Beto said. We know there was some other help there getting us where we needed to be. Officer Brian DeWitt concurred. We were down in the car, and a distinct voice says, help me, help me. Officer Jared Warner said, we've gotten together and just talking about it, and all 4 of us can swear that we heard somebody inside the car saying, help, but we're not exactly sure where that voice came from. None of the rescue teams said they thought the voice came from Grossbeck, the mom. I don't believe she survived the impact of the car crash, Johnson said. There was massive trauma. 2 firefighters said they also heard the voice before realizing there was a toddler in the car. They were able to cut the baby out of their car seat. Officers and firefighters formed an assembly line up the hill to pass the baby up to safety. Doctors from a nearby primary children's hospital were crediting the rescue team for saving Lily's life. On Tuesday, baby Lily's family released the following statement about her recovery. Her improvement is astounding. Right now, she's watching Dora and singing the wheels on the bus with Grandpa. We're blown away by Lily's progress and so grateful to her rescuers. Not surprisingly, the faithful came out in droves in social media and online comment sections. They insisted the voice came from the baby's mother and an entreaty from heaven to rescue her child. God intervened to save that child, either by sending an angel to call out on its behalf or by permitting the child's mother to cry out on its behalf, one read. And the baby was unconscious, and they all said they heard a distinct voice saying the word help. What's not to believe? But the naysayers countered, isn't this story amazing enough without inserting superstitious nonsense into the mix? And if God intervened, why didn't he save the mother too? There was even some curious comment that certain birds can mimic sounds and voices. Is it possible that a bird was mimicking the mom's voice from when the accident first happened? One commenter expressed frustration. Why do stories like this always turn into God versus no God and who believes in what? Can't we just simply be sad about the tragedy and happy for the fact that this little girl beat the odds and survived? Who cares why? Deep down, I think we all care why. We can't help ourselves. At one time or another, we must fess up to a deep anxiety about the existence or non-existence of an afterlife. It's the age-old argument favored by agnostics. The absence of evidence is the evidence of absence. But one commentator put it succinctly. For those who choose to believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who choose not to believe, no explanation is possible. I choose to believe. Maybe that's why they call it a leap of faith. How cool is that? You know, here we're just talking about the role that the angels play, and now then an article in the news, in the Detroit News, and actually it was picked up nationally, about this amazing thing that happened. There is a spiritual realm. It does exist in our world. It's not just a force of evil. Ephesians chapter 6 tells us that there is a hierarchy, and there is a plan, and there is a purpose to all of this. And this morning, we're going to take a few minutes and talk about the leader of this evil and this force that God describes in His Word. And his name is Satan. His name is Lucifer. He has many different names. And we have to kind of ask ourselves, is this stuff for real? I mean, is there really a devil? Does he run around with the horns and a pitchfork? And is that really what he is? And the reality is that Satan does exist. And if we believe God's word, and if we believe what the Bible has to say, we believe what Jesus had to say about it, then we have to believe that this created being exists. Mentioned in almost every book of the New Testament. If you go through and you look, 1 Peter 5:8 says this. It says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So who is he? How does the Bible describe this being? Let's open our Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 28. Ezekiel chapter 28. Let's begin to look at this being and where he came from and what he is like and try to figure out kind of what's going on and what happened here. Ezekiel chapter 28 will begin reading in verse 12. Now, what I want you to look at as we read this, it's very clear that God is talking about Satan, and he's talking about Lucifer. So as we read this passage, it's a fairly long passage. I want you to look for key words and key phrases that might describe what he looks like, that might describe what his character was like, that might describe, where he came from and all those things. So let's start in Ezekiel 28 and begin in verse 12, and let's read. It says, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings that they may gaze at you. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. It devoured you. I turned you to ashes upon the earth. And it goes on to describe this being that we're talking about this morning called Satan. So in this passage of Scripture, what does it say about him, and what do we know? Well, one of the things we know is we know that it says that he is a created being. It says, as you read down at the end of verse 13, it says, this was prepared for you on the day you were created. So there was a day when Satan did not exist. There was a day when Satan did exist. So he's a created being. He was created by the Creator. He was created by God. Now, in addition to this, we know that Satan was the anointed cherub. So of all of the angels that God created, he was the anointed cherub. And in fact, as we look at this and we see further in God's word in Job described, and we've talked about the fact that there are angels and there's a hierarchy among them. We know that it talks about archangels, and it talks about Gabriel, and it talks about Michael, and it talks about Lucifer, it talks about Satan, right? Out of these three angels that the Bible tells us about, that seem to be more powerful than the other angels, Lucifer seems to have preeminence among that group. He is the anointed cherub. And in fact, if we were to go back and read Jude 9, we would see that Michael, when contending with Moses for the body of contending with Satan for the body of Moses, did not dare bring a railing accusation against him, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." So let's put this in perspective. We've got this created being, we've got this angel that is the anointed angel. He is created to be in the presence of God. And let me explain what that means. In heaven, as well as on earth, but in heaven, there is no greater place of privilege than to be close to God. And Satan was given that amazing opportunity to be there. He's powerful. Michael the archangel does not take him on one-on-one, but he says, "The Lord rebuke you." He says he did not contend against Satan. We know that he's powerful because we see that when Moses goes and he's let my people go to Pharaoh, and we see these plagues that take place, that these miracles that Moses uses to show that God is with him, Satan is able to duplicate many of these miracles with his own magicians. Right? We know that he's powerful because we see what he does in the life of Job and the influence that he has, how he has the ability to control nature somewhat, how he has the ability to influence people, how he has the ability to influence our health and our well-being, right? So let's make sure that we understand this first and foremost, that this being that we're talking about this morning, Satan, he is very real. And the worst thing that we could do is to just act like he doesn't exist or pretend like he's not there. Because that is the first thing, man, that is just putting him in exactly the place to have victory. We've got to be aware of him. We've got to be aware of who he is. We've got to be aware of how he works. So he's this powerful being, but let's put it in perspective, created, right? As opposed to God, the creator. He is not God, but he's powerful. So let's look at this description as we go through. Verse 12, you were the seal of perfection. He described full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. So as we look at these characteristics, And as we read further down, and when we read Isaiah, we're going to read in a few minutes, we're going to see that what God does, what Satan does, in this situation, is he has all of these things that kind of set him apart from most of the other angels. And he begins to look at these abilities. He begins to look at this power. He begins to look at his beauty. He begins to look at his wisdom, and it all starts to go to his head. All of these things that God created to be used for good, Satan turns around and begins to turn that into something that is evil. Now, let's think about this in perspective. In our world today, God says, I don't want you to be like the world. I don't want you to love the world. And 1 John 2:15 says, what is the world? It's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Right? Now, let's go through and let's look at these traits that Satan has. Right? The seal of perfection, full of wisdom. So Satan is going to take this wisdom, all this wisdom that he has, and he perverts it. And what happens in our world today? It talks and it explains it in Corinthians, it explains it in Romans, but it describes a world where through wisdom they don't know God. It's a supposed wisdom. We're going to create a situation where we are so wise that we don't need God anymore. I can explain our existence apart from God. There's no need for God. That's fairy tale stuff. We are much more wise than that today. What is? That's Satan taking wisdom, one of these attributes that he's been given and is perverted, and he uses it in that way today. What else does it say? Perfect in beauty. He was very vain. How does the world teach us to judge people today? If you watch TV, or you watch movies, or you look at any kind of print, it's all outward. It's what you wear. It's how you look. All this emphasis is on outward beauty. I wonder why that is. Could it be that there's maybe something in our world that's driving us to place more attention on that than to what a person is really inside? We know God doesn't do that. Remember, he sent Samuel the prophet to choose David to be the new king. And he tells Samuel when he goes to look at the sons of Jesse, he said, I don't want you to look at the outward appearance because God does not look at people the way man does. God looks at a person's heart. Well, Satan's all about this looking right to the exclusion of this. It says he was in Eden. He was a seal of perfection. He's perfect in beauty. He's perfect in his ways. And it says, until iniquity was found in him. So he's created good, but then at some point in time, he's created with a free will, and he chooses to rebel against God. He chooses to turn against God, and he sins. Now we know, and we're going to look at this in more detail as we come up in the next couple weeks. We know that Satan is also able to convince a third of the angels in heaven to follow him. He has tremendous power, tremendous influence with this. It describes his timbrels and pipes. It describes the fact, what's that talking about? It's talking about music, right? He's very, very musical oriented. Am I saying that all music is bad? Absolutely not. We love music. But is it something that Satan might use it to corrupt and to take something that's very good and use it to corrupt? Yeah, absolutely. He describes the fact that his abundance of trading, what's that mean? It means that as he grew in significance and as he grew in power, began to recognize it all started to go to his head, and then he came to the place that he said, I want to be like God. I want to be God. And that's the beginning of his end, right? So that's who he is. He's this created being. He's an awesome in power. He's created, he's an angel, he's in a higher order than humanity. Hebrews talks about the order that man was created a little lower than the angels, right? So we know this about him. So let's try to find out just a little bit more as we look. He has all this power, but he has limitations. He has to ask God for permission to mess with Job. God has this hedge of protection around Job, and he has to ask God for permission. All right? So we know that's who he is. Now let's begin to look at his character. Go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8 and verse 44. All right? John chapter 8 and verse 44. This is who he is inside. Okay. So this is Jesus speaking, describing Satan. These are Jesus' words describing Satan. So John 8:44. He says, "You are of your father, the devil." All right? They've just accused Jesus of performing miracles with satanic power. All right? So he answers, he says, "You are of your father, the devil. The desires of your father you want to do." Now look, the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning. This is referencing Satan, right? He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. So probably I think one of the most important things we need to understand about Satan, he's a liar. He is a deceiver. He has no qualms, no issues at all of telling bald-faced lies to us. And we know this. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Remember? He's in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve have been told by God, don't eat this fruit. The day that you eat of it, you'll surely die. Satan looks at Eve. After a few moments of conversation, he says, "You won't die. You won't die. Nothing's going to happen. God he doesn't want you to be like him. You won't die." Why? Did man die as a result of that? Yes. All right. But Satan lies. He has no compunctions to proclaim something is good that is really evil. To proclaim that something is fun and will not have consequences. Does that fit what we see taking place in our world today? Right? Does that kind of fit the image that we see? That there's no consequences, it'll be okay. Drugs, they're not going to be a problem. You just have this, there are no consequences if you do drugs. It's just a fun thing. It's just something everybody does, that you're more accepted. There are no consequences. Are there consequences? Do you read the news in Harrison? Have you seen the deaths as a result of drug abuse? Why do so many people get sucked into that? Because they're fed a lie that it's not gonna be a problem. Won't happen to them. What about immorality? What about pornography? What about all of those things? Oh, it's not going to matter. Nobody will know. It's not going to have any kind of an impact. Listen, he is a liar. And he wants to deceive. And that's who he is at the core. It says he is a liar and the father of it when he speaks from his own resources. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources. Right? So what does that mean? It means don't believe everything that you hear. It means don't believe everything that you are told. He's very good at what he does. All right? We've got to be aware of that. He'll tell us that there are no consequences here. He'll tell us that there are no consequences eternally. Just like he told Eve, you won't die. There are consequences. The commercials that we see on TV with everybody partying and drinking and living it up and doing all those things, it never shows the next morning. The movies where affairs and immorality are glorified, it never shows the parents talking to their children, explaining why mom's not going to be living with dad anymore or dad's not going to be living with mom anymore. Right? He's a liar.
He wants to be God, and he can't be. Look at Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah 14 gives us a little more insight into who he is. Isaiah 14, and we'll begin in verse 12. And I believe that God gives us this information about Satan, not just to be academic, right? He gives it to us so we can understand our enemy, so we can watch the game films the week before and understand the things that he's going to do that we might expect him to do at game time, all right? Verse 12, how you were fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you were cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. And this is why he fell. For you have said in your heart, and I know if you've been around, we've read this before, let me just encourage you to look at something. I underlined every place he uses the word I in this passage, okay? Satan was so full of himself. He was so caught up in pride. He was caught up in pride about the things that God had given him, none of the things that he had created himself. All things that were gifts from God, right? You've said in your heart, verse 13, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Stars, reference to angels, okay? I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Right? And then God goes on to tell us, but he will be brought down to the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness? And it goes on and describes. But how you're fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, because he's caught up in pride. Understand this. He wants to be God. He does not want anybody to worship God. He wants the attention. He wants everything looking at him because that's who he is at the core. And anybody who worships God or anybody who does that is throwing it back in his face because that's who he wants to be and that's what he wants to do. We've talked over the past several weeks. Why is there so much hatred for Christianity? Why is there such hatred for Judaism? Because they are stealing worship that he wants. And he hates it. And he works in churches and he works in individuals and he does everything that he can to take away and discourage people from worshiping God. In fact, he approaches God in Job chapter 1. And God says, if you consider my servant Job, and Satan says, well, sure he's worshiping you. Look at all these things that you've given him. Take those things away and see if he still worships you. God says, that's fine. And Job still worships God, and it kills Satan. Right? In the end times, Revelation describes an antichrist that will come. And when you read about him, it says, we won't have to turn there for sake of time, it says in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3, it says, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. And the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. He wants to be God, but he can't, because he is created. He is not the creator, right? So how does he feel about that? He's angry. You think Satan can read? Probably. Think he's read Revelation? Yep. Think he knows how this is all going to turn out? Think he thinks there's anything he can do about it? Nope. So right now he's on a mission. And he's angry, and he's hurt, and he wants to hurt God. But how do you hurt an almighty God? How do you hurt the all-powerful being that is beyond the universe? You can't. You can't go on head and attack him. You can't hurt him that way. But one way you can't hurt him is by hurting those who God loves. And as you read, it kind of culminates in Revelation chapter 12, where it says, "Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell on them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time." Right? So he knows. He knows where this is all headed. So his mission in life is described, and we're going to look at it. It's to try to do as much damage, as much harm, to cause as much hurt to God, to take away from God, worship of God, to do anything to distract from that he can do. Because he's jealous, and it should be him that's being worshipped. That's what he thinks. So what does he do? He tempts us. He tempts us. Can Satan make me sin? The devil made me do it. No, he can't make us sin. He's not that powerful. James tells us that we sin when we're drawn away on it. We make the decision in our lives for whether we're going to sin or our actions we're going to do or we're not going to do. He cannot make that decision for us. However, he is very, very good at tempting and deceiving. How good does Satan think he is? I want you to think about this. How good does Satan think he is when it comes to tempting people? He took on Jesus. How arrogant would you need to be? But how good would you think you are, have to think you are, to take on Jesus Christ, the Son of God? But he does. And in the wilderness, he takes Jesus and he tempts him, and he tempts him, and he tempts him, trying to get him to go around the cross. Right? If he thinks he can make headway with Jesus, do you think he thinks he might be able to sway you? And I'll tell you what, he's very good. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3. It's my go-to, Genesis chapter 3. We're going to blow through this real quickly here. But I want us to look at this temptation and what he does with Adam and Eve in the garden. And again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But I want you to think about it, because he still does the same thing today. All right? Satan is able to take Adam and Eve in a perfect environment with God's only given them one restriction that we're made aware of: don't eat of the fruit of this tree. He's able to take them in a matter of minutes in a conversation and get them to the point where that's all they can think about, what they're not allowed to do. They're not thinking about all the other things they can do. Their mind is just simply focused on that which they can't do. And he does his magic. And what does he do? Let's just read it real quick. Genesis chapter 3. Verse 1. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God has made. He said to the woman, "Has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." Then the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be open, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw the tree was good for food, it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate it. Satan leaves, and now then they're just messed up. They've sinned. They've sinned against God, and we see Genesis chapter 3 giving the consequences of those actions. But what do we learn about the way he works? First is he's subtle. He does not approach us directly. He does not reveal who he is. And in fact, 2 Corinthians says that he's able to transform himself into an angel of light. He's able to take that which is evil and make it look good. He's able to take that which is good and make it look evil. He uses people around us to get to us, right? He doesn't appear as this big evil-looking being. He doesn't appear as a red devil with pitchforks and tail and stuff. That's not what he does, all right? He's subtle. Next thing he does, he maximizes restrictions. You can't do anything. Well, God just said there's one thing they can't do. And what does he do? He takes them and gets them to immediately focus on that which you're not supposed to do. So that all that they see is the one thing that God told them not to do. They can't see all the blessings and all the rewards and all the things that God has for them in that created place that they had made in Eden. Right? You ever been there? Isn't it amazing? Of all the things that God has in our lives and all the opportunities and how amazing it is to be a believer. You ever been to that place where all you can think about is that one thing that you know you shouldn't be doing? That's all I can think about. I don't think about all these other things. I'm just focused on this one thing. That's the way he works. Right? He maximizes restrictions. He gets us to focus on what is not allowed. He questions God's motives. Yeah, God's not really looking out for your best interest. There's nothing wrong with this. This isn't going to hurt anybody. This isn't going to hurt anything. He's a liar. You will not surely die. Look them right in the face. You will not surely die. He minimizes the sin. He relabels the action. It's not sin. It's becoming enlightened. Right? He mixes good and evil. Listen, I say this not to glorify him. I want us to be very aware that he's very, very good at what he does. He took on Jesus and thought he had a chance. Right? He's had thousands of years to experiment and to learn. He's full of wisdom. Be careful. All right? James 1:12 says, do not be deceived. When he's talking about this idea of temptation. Don't be deceived when you see this stuff going on. He can make it appear so good and so nice, so desirable to the eyes, and so he lies. Okay? He ruins lives. That's what he does. It's our choice as to what we will do. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it says that another thing that Satan does is that he blinds the minds of those who have not received Christ. Let me just read this real quick, and we're almost done. 2 Corinthians 4:4 says, whose minds the God of this age is blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. What's he do? He takes people who are sitting in a church service like this, who need Christ, and as they hear the message preached, they know, and they know in their heart that this is right, and then he distracts and he uses people as they leave the building or circumstance or something to take that, to snatch that seed away from them. It says, when he describes in the parable of the sower, it says what he does. He says that seed's planted, and he comes along and he snatches that seed before it can take hold. Right? Because he knows the power that is there. So he tries to get us distracted from God's word. He tries to get us blinded to those types of things. He doesn't want us spending time in this book because it's devastating to him. All right? So it says, he tells us that he deceives. He blinds the minds of believers. He removes the seeds of the word. With regard to believers, it says that in Matthew 13, verse 30 and 39, look at this. This is kind of interesting when you look at this, because you don't really think about Satan working a lot in churches, because this is God's house, and this is where we come to worship, and this is God's center right here, it seems. Look at Matthew 13. Matthew 13, verse 38. Let's start verse 37. It says, he's explaining the parable of the wheat and the tares. Jesus is. So he answers, says to him, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seeds are the sons of the kingdom. But the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. What's going on? So what happens is sometimes enemies would come into their fields in this agricultural society, and they would sow these weeds, these tares. And the problem is it was hard. You couldn't pull those up without pulling up the wheat too. So you've got this field, and it's got this weed, it's got this good stuff going on. And there's got these things over here that are destructive. This is going on. And it's hard to separate them out. And God says, look, it's hard for you to separate them out, but in the end, I will sort it out. But what's he actually saying? What he's saying is that Satan will many times, in the midst of a group of believers, he'll have tares, and he'll have maybe people there or sow discord or do those types of things. Why? Because if he can hurt the church, if he can hurt the testimony of God, man, he's just nothing but happy about it. And if he can get believers discouraged, because of what somebody else did, I mean, why is that God's fault? But that's the way he does it. Okay? He is very, very good at what he does. He tempts, he slanders, he hinders, he uses guilt. He doesn't want you to understand that there's things in your life that you just can't get past, that God can forgive and cleanse. Because if he can keep you hung up in your guilt, then it will affect your ability and your witness for God. It's all going to be made right in the end. Revelation 12:7 talks about this war that breaks out in heaven. Revelation 20:10 says the devil who deceived them was cast in the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Right? God will make it right in the end. But I think it's crucial for us to understand that there is more to this world than what we see with our eyes. As you read God's word, you begin to see what's going on. It helps us understand maybe why we struggle. Maybe why the world is so bent on this course that it's on. Greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. Satan only has the power in our lives that you allow him to have. Say that again. Satan only has the power in your life that you allow him to have. Okay? But don't be deceived. Right? He's at work. If you step up and you get involved and you start becoming effective or a threat in this war that he's waging, expect to get a little additional attention from him. Okay? That's why Ephesians 6 says, suit up. Put on your spiritual armor. Put on your shield of faith, your helmet of salvation. You're in a battle. Right? One day the battle will be won. It says in Revelation that they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of the testimony, and they were afraid not of their lives unto death. I want to tell you something that's happening even today. Don't give Satan a foothold into your life. If God's word says it's wrong, and God's word tells us that something is not right or that something is right, Don't be afraid to stand on that. He twists, he deceives, but he will not be victorious. We need to be aware of his devices. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just want to thank you for our time together. And Lord, I just pray, God, that as we look at your word and see this great enemy that's there, that we would not be afraid. You tell us that if God is for us, who can be against us? And you tell us that when you are a light in our salvation, there's no reason for us to ever fear. But help us to be aware of the work and what he does to discourage and work in our lives. Thanks for loving us. Thanks for hedging us about, God. Help us to live with our eyes opened in this world. In Jesus' name we pray. I'd like to invite you to stand just an attitude of prayer. This morning we went a little longer than we normally do. I want you to truly understand that this is not fairy tale stuff that we're talking about. He is real. He wants to discourage you. If you're discouraged, it's not from God. If you're being tempted or involved in something, that's not God doing those things. He's not going to bring those temptations in front of you. I want to challenge you this morning, if there's something in your life that shouldn't be there, to right now, before God, either at the altar or there at your seat, to bow your heads and ask God for your help and victory. And he will give it. We just have to recognize that it can't be me. It's all you, God. I'm going to give you just a few minutes as the music plays. If God's spoken in your heart, I invite you to spend some time. This time is yours. Very good at what he does. Don't let him discourage you. Don't accept his lies. Don't get stuck living with guilt. That's the exact opposite of what true Christianity is. Heavenly Father, Lord, this morning, we just want to thank you for being God and all that means. We recognize that there's evil in this world. We see it all around us, and you help us to understand why it's there. So we go into this with our eyes open, and we recognize the things that Satan does and the way he works. Help us to be aware. Give us the power to stand as we stand in you. Help us to fight this battle. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much for worshiping with us today.